Welcome all hunters, anglers, trappers, and shooters to the only fish and wildlife conservation podcast that goes behind the scenes of the business of conservation, the Connecting with Conservation podcast. Our podcast is hosted by John Gassett from the Wildlife Management Institute and Jim Cucaruto of the Outdoor Stewards of Conservation Foundation. John and Jim will talk with experts from all sectors of the conservation arena about their passion for conserving the great outdoors. So please welcome our hosts of the Connecting with Conservation podcast, John and Jim.
Welcome to another episode of Connecting with Conservation, the only podcast that goes behind the curtains to look at the business of conservation and how wildlife and fisheries management research is funded in our country. I'm John Gassett from the Wildlife Management Institute, and your co-host for Connecting with Conservation. I'm here with my fellow co-host, Jim Cucaruto from Outdoor Stewards of Conservation. Jim, how are you doing today?
Doing great, thank you. And, we've talked about a bunch of different topics on the podcast. And one of the things, in addition to how conservation is funded, we talk about all the great benefits of hunting and hunters, gun ownership, target shooting, fishing, and all that stuff. But we haven't covered this, and I've been wanting to do this for a while, the topic of, helping others, hunters helping others. And that's near and dear to me. It's such a great story. It's, there's no argument to it, right? So it works across any political spectrum. So it's a great topic. And without further ado, we'll bring in our guest, Josh Wilson from Farmers and Hunters Feeding the Hungry. So Josh, why don't you tell us a little bit about you personally, and then we'll get into the organization.
Yeah, sure thing, Jim. It's great to be with you guys today. And I am the executive director now of Farmers and Hunters Feeding the Hungry. It's a ministry that my dad started back in 1997, one of various Hunters for the Hungry programs that exist across the country. So we're just thrilled to be part of this movement. This was not what I was expecting to do out of college. My major was biology. My minor was education, high school, secondary education. So I had family of educators, my parents and my brother too, and so I figured that was going to be it. 1 year in the classroom, though, showed me otherwise. I had learned to be a friend of young people through a ministry called Young Life as a leader with that in college. And so stepping up in front of the classroom and trying to manage behaviors and be the authority figure didn't work real well. So I left that. Was involved in some youth ministry for a few years as Dad was getting this ministry started. And I guess it was a couple years into it in the late 90s, they had started talking about finding someone to help out with some of the office tasks and things. And I said, well, I'm doing this youth ministry work. Maybe I could do that part-time and help you part-time. And so that's how I first got involved with it officially. Then became the Maryland coordinator as the program grew beyond our state of Maryland. So I kind of ran things for us here in our own state, and then more of an operations manager as we got into a dozen or more other states. And then a few years ago, probably about 6-8 years ago, Dad finally retired from it completely. He's in his late 70s now. And so I moved into the executive director role, and that's kind of what brings us to today. Again, not what I expected 20 plus years out of college, but I guess that's true for a lot of people.
So it sounds like your dad was ahead of his time. 1997. I didn't realize it went that far back. Was there a particular story about, why he ended up starting it, or, what? It's not something you think of out of the blue. Who knows?
Yeah, right. Well, his story, if you will, occurred in Virginia. We hunted there. There was a farm near Front Royal, which is south of Winchester, Virginia, along the Shenandoah River. And so we had been hunting there for a few years. It's about an hour south of us here in Maryland. And Dad was on his way to that property, I believe, to celebrate the landowner's birthday one day in the summer. And he came upon a car stopped along the roadside, and he stopped to see if the person needed help. There was a lady standing there by the car, And so he got out and asked if she was broken down. She said, no, but I need your help over here off in the field. And he said, oh, well, what's going on? She said, well, there's a deer over there I need to load into the trunk and take home to feed my kids. So he went off into this field, and this is, how you hear stories for many years and then you find out a new detail about it that you never realized. I always thought the deer was right there along the road, like we see when we're driving and see a roadkill deer. He said, oh no, a couple years ago, he said, I don't know how, maybe I never told you, but it was off in the field, like 100 yards off the road on a church property. So what that meant was she didn't just come along and see this deer. She was actually out actively looking to be able to see an animal that had been hit and ran that far off the road. So he had to drag it back over to the roadside. He offered to field dress it. She said, no, it makes a mess in the trunk. I just take it home. My kids and I have gotten pretty good at cleaning them and taking care of it since my husband's been gone. And so I think he asked a few more questions about calling an officer, a game warden, or tagging it. And she seemed to be getting a little irritated with him. So he realized, okay, I just need to help her. So he loaded it into the trunk for her. She thanked him and drove away. And for Dad, I would say it was a spiritual experience. The way he recounts it, all he could think of was the verse in Matthew 25 where Jesus says, I tell you, when you've done it to the least of these, my brothers and my sisters, you've done it to me. And he's talking about feeding and clothing, helping those that are less fortunate. And so all I could think of was that verse. And so he went on to the farm, and his head was still just kind of caught up in all that. He explained the whole story to the folks there, and they asked, well, did you get a phone number? Can we find her? Can we help further? Well, no, I didn't. And so they scratched their heads and said, well, there's this Virginia Hunters for the Hungry program here, and we've gotten information about it. And that program had started, I think, in the early 90s. They said maybe we could be more intentional about donating. We're doing deer management here on the property with some help from the state biologist. We know we have to harvest additional does and so forth. Maybe we can be more intentional about donating more of those. So I remember doing that there. I can remember finding the butcher, trying to get there before they closed with that deer that you wanted to donate. And but that fall, it just really stuck with him. We had a program in Maryland that was already in operation, but it required that the hunter would pay part of the bill, like a copay. The Virginia program was one of the early programs, or maybe one of the first ones, where the organization raised money to pay the whole processing bill so that hunters could donate without that fee. So Dad wanted to kind of bring that model back to Maryland. So he talked to a couple local butchers. They said, sure, let's give it a shot. Talked with our church. And so for the first year or two, it was a program of our local church. Then I believe it was in 1999 it became a separate organization, and just grew from there. People from other states, Dad had contacted the Virginia director, asked him, hey, how do you do it? What's different about it? Picked his brain, met with him a couple times, got a year or two into it himself. And as people started picking up on it, people he knew from bow hunting over many years and shooting competitive archery, some outdoor writers and so forth would write about this program Dad had started. He started hearing from people in other states, just like he contacted Virginia. Hey, can we do something similar? Can you show us how? Can we work through your organization and so on? So that's kind of how it got started. It grew over the first decade or so. Then, we kind of had some declines. So like any organization, there's peaks and valleys. Right now we function in about 12 to 15 states, with Maryland and Ohio being kind of our cornerstones where we run the program for the whole state in those two locations. And then we have about a dozen others where we may have a couple of volunteers with a few butchers in the state, sometimes coexisting with another state program that does the bulk of the work there. But interestingly, I was looking not long ago just to see, well, where have we been over the 26, 27 years since this got started? And we've paid butcher bills in 30 different states over that time. So, of course, like I say, some have come and gone, and that's natural, as you guys know, in any kind of really industry, or especially in nonprofit work. But so it's been an exciting journey, and we're excited and just want to see what comes next.
Yeah, well, Josh, we appreciate all you're doing there. And, I always thought as a trained deer biologist, it made common sense to me. We have a super abundant population of especially white-tailed deer. In many cases, they're overabundant. Increased vehicle collisions, increased insurance claims, crop damage, all the things that go along, tick loads and the associated, tick illnesses that come with that. And you're probably very familiar with that in the Northeast with, the kind of the origin of Lyme disease. But you got all these excess deer that we need to remove. The agencies need hunters to do that. The problem is hunters have a freezer capacity. They're willing to take in Kentucky, about 1.5 deer per year per successful hunter goes in the freezer. So what do you do when you have 4 tags in your pocket? You get more hunting opportunity. You get to help out those that are less fortunate. You get to, it's a program that people relate to, even non-hunters relate to. So just always seemed like a natural fit for me. What are y'all's thoughts? I mean, are you still looking to actively grow the program, or you're where you need it to be, or what do you see going forward with this? 'Cause I know there's a number of states that have different variations of this. I'm just curious about where y'all are.
Right. Well, yeah, we're always open. I tell people we are always open to helping new people get involved, bring this kind of program to their area if it doesn't already exist. There are really about 40 states right now that hunters can participate in some kind of an organized program. Many of those are statewide. Some are run by the state agency like DNR or Division of Wildlife. Some are part of a food bank network. A number of them are independent organizations like ours is, and the Virginia program and some others. There's a few that the Wildlife Federation runs the program in the state. But all told, when you put all of it together, like I say, there's about 40 states where hunters have that opportunity. And I think a lot of people just don't realize that. Even here in Maryland, we still find people that say, well, I would donate, but I don't want to pay the bill. Well, you don't have to pay the bill. Find a participant that works with us, and we try to pay the bill for you. So there's plenty of education that still needs to happen. So we kind of sit in a spot where, yes, we have our own program that we run in a few states, like I'd mentioned, and then scattered in other places. We try to connect people with other existing programs. If they contact us and want to know how they could participate or what have you, I do a search and see where they're located and what we might be able to connect them with. If there isn't a program there, I talk with them about what's involved in coordinating it and how they could work with us to do that. So we just try to find the right fit for each person when they come along and see what we can do to help them be part of the solution, part of this movement.
Man, it's a great story, great origin, and powerful organization now, and plenty needs to be done, today and moving forward tomorrow as well. And you mentioned it's providing information, educating people on it, hunters, about the opportunity and the need. So let's kind of get into some of the numbers. Last I checked, and maybe you have a different number, there's something like 34 million Americans struggled with food insecurity on a daily basis, and there's only 320 million Americans, something like that, in the U.S. So more than 10% of people are, having some sort of hunger issues on a daily basis. And then we can get into kind of the numbers that hunters and farmers help with. But, do you have some stats behind that type of stuff?
Yeah, those kinds of things, the numbers can change from time to time, and depending on which organization you're looking at. I did look this morning just to see what Feeding America, which is the nation's largest food bank network, what they were currently showing. And their website says that there's like 47.4 million people, that includes 7.2 million children living in households where food security is an issue. So that's a lot. And then a similar number, kind of a little different stat, but along the same lines, they say that about 50 million Americans turned to charitable organizations for food assistance and food support as of 2023, so just a couple years ago. I think a lot of times we don't see it, depending on where you live. Certain parts of states maybe, or certain parts of a county, you might not be as aware of the need. I do remember one time a local assistant principal attended an event that we had here. It was a banquet event we were doing, and we were talking about need, and he said, "Yeah," he said, "I got to see this firsthand not long ago, serving cafeteria duty, lunch duty as assistant principal at the high school, and here's a student, just eating like a pig," is how he put it, and making a commotion. Other kids laughing and teasing and so forth. And he went over and, "Hey, you can't eat this way. What's going on? You're going to have to calm this down. Stop making a joke out of lunch." Walks away. Same thing happens. He comes back by, says, "All right, we're putting an end to this. You go to the office. I'll come talk to you. We'll figure out what's going on after the lunch shift. Can't act this way." Lunch shift ends. He goes over to the office, talks with him, says, "What's going on? Why are you making a joke out of lunch? You're acting like a clown. You're eating, food's everywhere." He said, "Well, I'm sorry, sir. I was hungry." He says, "Well, you're going to have to come up with something better. I have to watch 3 lunch shifts of kids eat before I get my lunch after that. I'm hungry too." He said, "No, you don't understand. Last night wasn't my turn to eat." And he realized right then and there, oh, this isn't a behavior issue. This is a deeper issue related to this household and their need for some food assistance. And so, yeah, a lot of times we don't see it, and it's right under our nose. It could be the neighbor, it could be somebody in your church, somebody at your workplace, and we're all good at putting on that good face. We don't want anybody to know that we're struggling, but the need is real, and it's out there. And you could get in. I know different people will have different views about, well, what's our need like compared to the need in other parts of the world? Is it truly need, and so on and so forth. I try not to get into that too much. I would say to that, God has asked us to help the people around us. It's not my job to figure out what's real need, what's not real need. My job is to try to help people. That's me being faithful to a calling from the Lord that really gives to all of his people. So we'll let him sort out, you know, issues of finer points of need and so forth. And let's just do the job that we can, the best that we can do it.
Well, one of the other big issues I think is important to mention about food insecurity is, there are obviously various types of foods, and usually the least expensive stuff, if you are in a situation where you can't afford, a high protein diet from a grocery store, are your, high carb, high fat, high sugar content stuff. Venison's just, it's one of the ultimate, high quality proteins out there. It's, 60% of the calories of beef, 80% less fat. It's just such a better quality meat as far from a health perspective. And if you find a restaurant that serves it, it's a premium to pay for that. But here it is where, the people that need it most can really get it for free. If they need it, they can get it through programs like yours. So, I think that's lost on a lot of people. It's like, well, I can get my kids some food, but can you get them the food that's the quality they need to thrive?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And like you said, wild game, venison in particular, high in the B vitamins, zinc and iron, critical nutrients, especially for developing young people, children. I was just not long ago looking and came across, it was talking about the ratio of omega-3 fatty acids to omega-6, and that in America our diet is skewed the wrong way, that the omega-6 like 20 to 1 to the omega-3s. And I'm not a nutritionist, but a little bit of digging, revealed that, okay, so the omega-6 kind of leads to more inflammation in the body, and the omega-3s are better at handling that or treating that. Well, with deer, it's more like a 2 to 1, 2 or 3 to 1. So much, much better than that average in the American diet. So yeah, it's like every time we learn something more, we realize just how healthy and beneficial the resource is.
Yeah, and so I'm a numbers guy, right? 15 years looking at numbers of hunters and target shooters and meat donations and all that sort of stuff, and try to simplify things to show people, okay, 40 million, however many million people dealing with food insecurities, just to put a number on it. So, there's a lot of different numbers for hunters out there too, but couple years ago, we had done a study where we tried to determine how many people had bought a hunting license at least once within a 5-year period. And it was about 21 million people, consider themselves hunters because they bought a license one time, two, three, four, five times out of a 5-year period. And only, maybe 10, 12 million of them might go on an annual basis. But, then there's a percentage of those. And I think it was maybe 8% or something said that they donated deer or some sort of game meat. So do you have any stats on the number of, pounds and all that sort of stuff? I think the NRA had put out something with the National Wild Game Meat Donation Month saying that hunters harvested 600 million pounds of meat, which equated to 2.4 billion meals. That's total harvest. But let's get down to, overall.
Yeah, I mean, we in our organization, and I think a lot of the programs out there had a really good year just this past hunting season. Probably the best one in 3 to 4 years, and a lot of times that depends on what was the weather like. The numbers go up and down. Assuming your number of participating butchers stays relatively constant, the donation numbers will go up and down some based on the harvest totals in a state, the weather, and so forth. But we had a great year. Over 4,000 animals donated just to our program alone, which is going to put us somewhere around 160,000 pounds or over 600,000, 640,000 meals for the year to add to our total. And that's going to bring us pretty close to 24 million meals all told since 1997. But we are just one slice of the overall movement. And so, yeah, as you mentioned there, the aggregate totals are even larger. It can be hard to get it exact because, there's not like a central organization that gathers the data in a concrete way each year to be able to say, here's what all these 40 plus or minus programs did last season. But I think on average, I know some groups have 1 year or another over the past 4 to 5 years have gathered that info the best they could. And I think what we see is somewhere in the neighborhood of, say, 2.5 million to close to 3 million pounds of meat donated annually by hunters across the country. Now, some of that may be just hunters giving to someone else that they know has a need, like giving a deer to a family and not through an organized program. But a good chunk of it, probably well over half of it, going through organizations like ours and all the others that are out there. So you're talking maybe 10 million servings, give or take 10 million servings a year, which sounds like a lot. But then you look at the staggering hunger numbers and you realize, oh, it's really not that much. But I kind of look at it like, well, there's different pieces to this puzzle, and we just do the best we can with the piece that we've been given. The Hunters for the Hungry part, all these different organizations trying to help each other and keep the movement growing. But there's certainly a lot of room for growth. There's a lot of potential. I know in our states that we operate in, it's usually somewhere around 1 or 2% of the deer harvest in the state ends up donated. And I think as I looked at a few of the other states that are out there, and it's somewhere usually in that range, just anywhere from 1 to a couple percent. So that shows that there's a lot more potential for growth if people are aware of how it works. So, if you're a hunter and you want to participate in this, first of all, you need to know there are programs like these out there. Then you need to figure out, well, how can I connect with the one that serves my state or my area? Is there a website or somewhere I can go? Can I get a list of butchers that participate? So you got to find one of those butchers and then take your deer that you field dressed and tagged and get it to that butcher shop. And then usually that's it. If you can get it that far as the hunter, if we can get a hunter that far, then that's their part's done. And then the program takes over from there with paying the processing bill. Fortunately, a lot of the butchers give a discount to an organization when they're working with you. We get usually about 20% off, some more, some less, depending on where they are. And then once that meat's ready, butchers will typically have a call list of local distribution partners, and these could be a food bank, it could be a smaller food pantry, a rescue mission, or shelter of some kind. So they'll call on those groups to come pick that meat up and handle the distribution side. But again, there's a lot more potential if people that hunt become more aware of what's going on, that they can be part of it. That in many cases they don't have to pay the processing bill. Some might be familiar with some of those older programs from the 80s where it was much more grassroots and kind of depended on the hunter to get the deer, pay the butcher to process it, and then deliver the meat themselves to a food pantry. And it just doesn't need to work that way anymore. There's other options.
So, a related question to that is well, first a statement. And that's it. One of the other thing I like about wild game meat is it's fairly inflation proof. There's not a lot of inputs to you don't have to feed the deer until once they're harvested. You got one input basically. That's the cost of having processed. Which $1.50, $2 a pound maybe on average to process a deer if you're grinding it. Whereas ground beef or ground chuck is where 2 years ago it was $1.50 or $2 a pound. Now it's $5 or $6 a pound. So it doesn't go up as rapidly when you deal with inflation that the domestically produced animals, where there's lots of inputs that have to be paid for, whether it's feed or veterinary care or whatever goes into all that, transportation, processing, and all that. So do you ever? I know you've done this long enough. Do you see a decrease in donations when beef prices go up because more people tend to donate fewer deer? Or you got to have X number of pounds of meat to feed your own family, and if you're doing it half with beef and half with deer, all of a sudden the price of beef is 3 times what deer are. I'm putting 2 more deer in the freezer, so I don't have to buy as much beef. But that means that might be the deer I donated. So
yeah, I think that does have an impact on the donation numbers. I had mentioned before things like the overall deer harvest in the state or the weather, and how they play into that, affecting donations. But yes, another factor that we hear sometimes, the butcher might say, yeah, my numbers were down on the donations this year. More people were keeping them for themselves in this economy. So yes, that definitely plays a role.
Yeah. So there are some resources out there, for example, I think the National Rifle Association, as well as the National Deer Association, have lists of butchers that participate in some sort of program. It's not complete, but certainly check out those resources. Outdoor Stewards of Conservation, outdoorstewards.org, put that list on our website. So we'll make the direct ask. So if you're a hunter, if you know a hunter, and if the opportunity presents itself, if you got an extra tag and you've got more deer on the landscape than you think is it's capable of holding, go ahead and mark it down, donate a deer this season, and help some families out. If you need more information, just Google a farmers and hunters or hunters feeding the hungry program. There's plenty of information out there. And obviously, doing God's work. I mean, these are great stories that help other people. I have a processor when I was in Connecticut that I would donate to when the opportunity arose. And, it was free, and it went to the Waterbury Food Bank. And, on occasion you say, okay, hey, do you mind if I grab the back straps? And, you can give them a tip of $20 or something. And some places automatically say, do you want some steaks or something like that? So the feeling that you get, from start to finish, donating any game meat to, helping out at a food pantry, volunteering, hunters are really doing a lot of great work. So we want to thank all them and, remind the ones that may not be doing it to help out if they can. So where can they find more information about your organization specifically, I guess?
Yeah. So our website is pretty simple. It's just feedingthehungry.org, feedingthehungry.org. And, you can go there, or if you just search for Hunters for the Hungry, or for us, it'd be Farmers and Hunters Feeding the Hungry. They'll certainly find our site. We're also on social media. We go by Hunt Down Hunger on those. So it's kind of a phrase we came up with that, it's an action phrase. We're going to hunt down hunger together. So we try to use that where we can. But yeah, you're right. The big thing here is I don't think hunters, by and large, realize the side benefit maybe to participating in programs like these. various studies in recent years have shown that the number one thing that influences public perception of hunting and hunters is what do you do with the meat? I think there's this misperception that hunters are all about sport and trophy and so forth. But if you can show people that hunters either consume most of the meat that they harvest or give it away to family and friends or donate it through a donation program so that the meat gets used, the resource doesn't go to waste, that makes a huge impact in a person's perception of hunting and hunters, particularly those that don't hunt themselves. So that's the byproduct of this, is that it just has this great effect on showing people that, hey, hunters are serving their communities. You go way back in history, and I'm not an anthropologist, but we know that hunting and gathering predated agriculture and then kind of went hand in hand, and that's how communities survived. As agriculture took over and then commercial agriculture, particularly in some parts of the world like ours, people got further and further away from any thoughts of hunting and gathering until maybe something like COVID came along and people realized maybe I should be able to get my own local food again, because sometimes the meat case is empty or the grocery store prices went through the roof. But yeah, so just it's a great win-win all around, and we just try to do our part in the areas that we serve, and also to help the other programs be successful, because really it's a whole movement, and the bottom line is it's about hunters helping their fellow man. I know we're about out of time, but one story that sticks with me, I think this was 2 hunting seasons ago. There was a young man in Ohio named Hunter, of all things, who decided he wanted to learn to hunt. And his reason was he wanted to donate the meat to help feed others. So he did, and he got his first deer, and he donated it. Mom and Dad saw that. They said, we should learn to hunt too, so we can help. So they both learned, got hunting that same season, and got their first deer, both of them, and donated them. So a family, all 3 of them, first-time hunters, and their motivation was they saw the good they could do to help others in their community, and they wanted to be part of it.
Josh, that's awesome. And I know we're guilty of this too. We refer to programs like this as a side benefit of hunting or side benefit of conservation. And on this show, we're still new. We've not had hundreds of guests yet, but many dozens of guests that all of which have their own niche in conservation. But I think if you put them all in a room and ask them, what's the most important thing that comes out of what we do for conservation? Feeding hungry people. I don't think anybody'd say, well, my issue is more important than that. I think everybody would agree that this is a central part of what we do. We appreciate what you and your organization does, as well as all the other organizations out there. To the sportsmen and women out there, if you have an opportunity to take an extra deer, donate it to one of these programs. You're helping folks out. You help keep the programs viable, and they're feeding many, many, many thousands of people, if not millions. So please consider doing that. Support these programs financially as well if you have the ability to do so. If you enjoyed this podcast, please listen to our others. Subscribe if you want to hear some of the new ones. You want to know when the new ones are coming out. We'd be happy to make sure you get aware of that. And hope you enjoyed this one as well. Other than that, we'll see you in the woods or on the water. So have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Connecting with Conservation podcast. Please do us a favor and tell your buddies, friends, family, and others about what you've learned here today. If you like what you heard, come on back anytime and listen to another episode of the Connecting with Conservation podcast.